dive into chapter 8, which is the last chapter for this week in terms of our exercise psychology, sports psychology course. So let's dive into self-perception and getting into the nuts and bolts of, really what self-perception is and how it relates to exercise. So first and foremost, before we get into the first slide and everything like that, let's just talk about really what, self-perception is in its own right. And I mean, if you think about it, it's self obviously being you, your own person, and then the perceptions are perceiving things. So it's really about how we reflect. It's really more about how we reflect on how we like think and feel about who we are, what we're made up of, so our attributes, and then I would definitely say that it goes along with what our ability levels are, and then obviously it's a way that we can look at it from the standpoint that it's really important in our well-being. All right. So again, more about how we think and feel about ourselves, our attributes and our abilities, and that really gives a pretty broad definition of what we're looking for. So, but with self-perceptions, there comes a few other terms that have popped up previously, and one of them was self-efficacy, or your own feeling about your own ability levels. But then we're going to move from that into what we would want to talk about in terms of self-esteem, self-esteem, self-concept, and then body image. Okay, so with self-esteem, it's how you feel about you, how you feel about yourself. So I like the fact that this is actually a really good statement there, where it says it influences and is influenced by all aspects of your life. All right, self-esteem, sometimes you can think about it as self-worth. It is more. This is definitely the global perspective that we would look at from the self-perception standpoint. We'll look at all encompassing for that, but it's really about how you feel about yourself, and that's really what it comes down to. Whereas self-concept is how we see or we define ourselves. So really the main thing you'd want to say with self-concept is, if we were to add this in, is the really old question of who I am or who am I? Okay. That's really important to understand, but it's how we see or define ourselves, our self-concept. What is it that we conceive amongst ourselves? And then lastly, with self-concept too, there's a few aspects that we can pay attention to in terms of the general self-concept and then the physical self-concept, and we'll get into those in a little bit as we get into like the domain part of everything, and that's going to come up in the next few slides. And then lastly, your body image, or this relates to self-concept, but this is more about how we judge or see ourselves, in terms of our body appearance, how we perceive our abilities. And body image can vary amongst maturation levels. All right, so that's really what it comes down to. But the thing we have to understand with body image is how it breaks down into different dimensions, and if we wait a little bit on that, that'll come up down the line as well, so that we can kind of get more in depth into that. But those are three defining moments that we want to talk about in terms of self-perception. So self-concept, when we look at the domains of self-concept, because this needs a little bit more. Self-esteem is pretty straightforward, whereas self-concept, it's not a term that we talk about so much. So when we look at this diagram here, really you give it, your self-concept is really over, a general self-concept kind of a mentality. All right. And that's like that. If we were to go into like this hierarchy here, you can see that, general self-concept is really the overall encompassing aspect of self-concept in general. All right. Then from there, you can look at everything from the standpoint of academic or non-academic. And then what is it that you're looking at? If it's academic, English, history, math, science, civics, geography, biology, whatever it may be. Okay, all of that breaks down into there. Whereas the non-academic self-concept, talking about social, emotional, and physical. the one that we're really, I guess the best way, that's the one we're most, in tune with because of our exercise, our wellness, fitness domain that we have within the course that we're teaching here. But social and emotional play a part in that as well. But if you look there, the non-academic part of it, they're breaking down to those three. Now, the social self-concept, that breaks you down, really simply put, peers and then significant others, and how you behave around that. Emotional is what emotional states you're in. And then the physical concept is your physical ability and your physical appearance. And this is where we were saying how body image can play a role in someone's physical self-concept. Okay, and that's just a breakdown of the hierarchy like we were talking about. So with body image, what we look at is these four aspects. All right, the four aspects right here: perceptual, cognitive, affective, or emotional, and then behavioral. All right. So when we look at the perceptual dimension, all right, this is basically a reflection of the picture of your own body that you have in your mind, how you perceive that. Okay. And that's the perceptual component of it. All right. So really, if we think about it, it's how we see our body when we look in the mirror. And then really, it's how we imagine ourselves, in terms of how we look. So, do you find yourself to be a bigger person, a smaller person, a taller person, a shorter person, a fatter person, a thinner person? Short, tall, we talked about. Or, and then the other things too are things like, are you muscular or lean? Are you flabby? There's just different words we can use for that. All right. Cognitive, we always want to think about is that thought process. Um, you know, and really it's more about how we think about and evaluate our body. Okay, that's really what we want to pay attention to there. All right, we want, how we think about it. Do we find ourselves to be at, strength? Are we? Do we believe that we have strength? Do we believe we are fit? Do we believe we are attractive? Those are all parts of the cognitive. All right. The affective or emotional dimension is more about, how our body image really, um, it looks at how feelings. Affective is always, affective or emotional is more about the feelings component of everything. So it's, feelings experienced in relationship to your body's appearance and your function. All right. So an example of that, is if you have this positive feeling about your body. So you're gonna, if you have that kind of positive feeling, you're gonna be more comfortable within yourself. You take pride in what what you look like. If you look at the picture right here of the little cat that looks like a lion, that's what, that's more of a positive look or a positive feel. Whereas with negative feelings, you might be looking at yourself in terms of causing more anxiety, or you might feel shameful, like I can't believe I look like that. Or and to get really bad in terms of those negative feelings is you might have that level of disgust, and that's not good either. All right. And then lastly, with the behavioral dimension, this is how we basically we reflect on everything in terms of positive or negative perceptions, positive or negative thoughts, and then feelings upon our bodies. And then that comes into play when we are deciding things like, what are you going to wear today? And then, you always hear about the individuals who are like, yeah, don't wear stripes because it makes you look bigger, or wear black because it makes you look thinner. Like, that's a behavioral type of activity where, it's part of the behavioral dimension. And that really comes into play based on how you feel your body image is all about. Okay. So looking here, here we talk about factors that influence it. But really, interpersonal experiences. Have you ever been teased? Um, Psychological factors, behavioral factors, physical characteristics. What is it really that you are physically made up of, and that can make a big difference. Social cultural influences. Like, I know that in specific cultures, are like they don't really have a care for what their body looks like, or television or magazines. Those are all aspects, and then obviously physical changes. and my students know this, but back in 2009, I actually got very, very sick. Well, I had massive, um, physical changes in my body, and I went from, a very strong, athletic body to, I lost 29 pounds in 9 days being in the hospital, and that really changed me. I came out looking more gaunt, more drawn out. My face looked very like thin, like skeleton thin, and that really made a difference in me. And so like then I started to have doubt about my body and if I was ever going to get stronger again or look, like look the part. So that really comes down to play. All right. But I never got to the point where, it started to have like it says here, disturbances and that comes with that whole component of like with when we talk about addiction as a disease. Well, body image disturbances can be clinically labeled as a disease, like with anorexia or bulimia. And then you have body dysmorphia, which is really, really, really tough because you basically see what what your body looks like, and you have this distorted image of really what it is. So that comes into play for for your body image and how you really just you look at it in so much of a negative sense that it changes your perspectives on everything. So we should probably break this down a little bit more, but let's just kind of take into the fact of what anorexia is. Let's just break it down a little bit more. But remember, again, anorexia is more about how you perceive yourself to be. Your body image is just low. All right, you're very fearful of gaining weight. You feel like you don't look good, and so what'll happen is you'll end up with this restrictive eating, or you might get into something that's more like binge and then purge. That can happen, which is a little bit different than bulimia, where bulimia is just where you eat and purge regularly. All right. So with anorexia, that's very much restrictive, but there are those other types that are there as well. But really, the more common of the anorexia nervosa types is restricting your caloric intake, where you're not binge eating or purging. You're actually just severely low on calories and you start getting sick from it. Bulimia is where you binge eat followed by, a purge aspect, and that is to help you. That's again looking at it from the standpoint that you don't want to gain weight. All right. Now, body dysmorphia it's more like an obsession that you have some sort of like flaw in your appearance, even though even though it might not even be there. Like you just think it in your own head, and from there you start developing these ideas that even though there might be a slight abnormality, you overanalyze them and you perceive them as to be bigger than what they are, which leads to then anxiety. Then it leads to some like obsessive compulsive concerns. And then you're constantly looking at yourself in the mirror. You're always analyzing everything. And then what you end up doing is you just stay, because you don't feel like you look good enough or you don't want other people to see you, you end up starting to avoid being around others socially. So that's very, very scary. All right. And then muscle dysmorphia is basically when people, it's the same concept as body dysmorphia, except instead you're going to feel like you're smaller or inadequate in terms of, muscularity. All right. And then that's where, there has been inside of the book, it basically talks about in like a really short part of that with muscle dysmorphia is these are individuals who sometimes have this, they get to that point where they feel so insufficient that they may start to take use steroids or other synthetics to kind of get out of that rut of what they feel like they look like. Okay, so really, really kind of scary. So let's get into the measurement component of all of this. So with self-esteem, there's like it says, in general self-concept measures, there's a few things that you can look at in terms of what we call the Rosenberg self-esteem scale. There's a Tennessee self-concept scale, and then there's a self-esteem subscale from what we call the physical self-description questionnaire. All right. The Rosenberg is a really, really simple survey that you would take and really what it comes down to is, how do you answer these kind of questions right here? How do you answer these 10 questions? And then what you can then do is kind of determine what the sums are to see where you score highest in to see how you feel about yourself. Okay. And it's again, really simple questions, really easy to kind of go along with. All right. Then you have something, like here, this is the PSDQ, or the physical self-descriptive questionnaire. And these are sample items that you see, whereas the subscale is like appearance, and it says something like, I am looking good. And what you're doing with that is you're basically, there's 70 items that these are samples, but there's 70 items that are put into what they call 9 subscales, and then you assess them based on the responses that come from that. Okay. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to read each item, and then you're going to indicate the extent to which the item is true or false about yourself. All right. And then there you have where a 1 is a false and a 6 is a true. You can basically see, if things are true, I hardly ever get sick or ill. Well, true, 6. Okay. If you get sick all the time, it's a 1. And so the higher the score, the better you feel about your self-concept, your self-perception. Okay. And it's a really kind of a simple process where you can kind of get into a simple process where it really is not that hard to define whether you get a higher or a lower score. It's just that, some things you may say false on, and that comes down to that right there. And really it's more about the higher the better, but we really are thinking about this whole self-concept thing and how we feel about ourselves and how we perceive ourselves. And, I feel good about who I am physically. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a really simple response. Is it true or is it false? And that makes a big difference with that. Okay. So in terms of body image measures, it says here, there's measures that exist for all 4 domains in terms of the perceptual, the cognitive, the affective, and the behavioral. All right. With perceptual, like it says here, they assess the accuracy of a person's judgment. Cognitive, you assess an individual's satisfaction, attitudes, and beliefs about their body. With affective, you assess the feelings like worry, shame, anxiety, comfort, embarrassment, and pride. And then with behavioral, you assess the frequency at which you might engage in things that feel like you're becoming disturbed with your image. So those are ways that you can measure it in terms of keeping it consistent and seeing where the faults are in there. All right. Now, a body image measure here, this is actually giving you what you're perceived at. And then by answering questions down here on the bottom, you might not be able to see it so well, but we can zoom in a little bit to kind of give you a little bit of an idea. But I wish that I were more muscular, but if you look at what you see up top here in these images, and then you go down here, it's like, oh, well, if you have both of these in terms of, what you're perceived at, and then you look at the same, you look at those images and you see, oh, well, this person really doesn't carry around maybe a lot of body fat, and just say that the images show that. Well, how are they, in your mind, you're like, well, how are they saying that they feel like they are less muscular? I wish that I were more muscular. And if it's always, well, then that means that their body image, their self-perception, their body image that they see is just off. And that's where we can start to kind of make some determinations as to what we need to do. All right. So the effects of, and so we'll move into the effects of exercise. So when we look at everything here, let's go back to that original size. There we go. So, when we look at everything in terms of the effects of exercise on, like it says, our global self-esteem and our general self-concept, really, like it says here with exercise, it has a small but significant influence on our global or general self-perceptions. And how we know that is if we come down here to where it says number of effect sizes. What this is actually a research article that was done, a meta-analysis where they take a bunch of different articles and they compile all this data. And what they're seeing is, okay, there's the number of effect sizes. The average effect size is what we're looking at, and that's what we would call the D score, or Cohen's D. And what that means is that the higher this number is and the closer it gets to 1, the stronger the effect is. Okay, so if we look at things here, a 0.2 means that it's really a small effect size. A 0.5 is roughly a moderate effect size, and a 0.8 is a large effect size. So you can see here that many of these things in terms of frequency, intensity, and duration hold a small to moderate effect size, which means, do these really have an overall effect on every person? Okay, and that's what we have to look at. All right. So with exercise, again, it can have significant effects on aspects of our physical self-concept, which is great. And then improvements in physical self-concept may be accompanied by improvements in global self-esteem. Well, of course, so even though like this is kind of tough because this is, again, is off of research, but each individual is different. All right. So if we're looking at everything from an exercise standpoint, we need to realize that, yeah, physical concept, how we feel about our physical component of it may not directly reflect on how we feel about our body image per se. Okay. So looking here, in terms of, and it says here, exercise and the self-esteem model, and to account for effects of exercise on the global self-esteem and physical self-concept, if we look at global self-esteem, all right, if we have a physical measure where someone goes about 1.25 miles, or about 1.25 kilometers versus 2, all right, we'll talk about the differences here. So what we're doing is, this is the original intent of the person's physical activity, moving from specific to general. What happens here is with these physical measures, we can get a determination of physical self-efficacy, or their ability. We can then see what their physical competence is like, which shows us what their physical acceptance is of who they are, and that gives us an idea of what their global self-esteem is. Now, if we provide an intervention, okay, for that, because what we're going to do is try to change up the exercise habits, all right, what you're going to see is a change in physical measures, meaning that now they've walked about 3/4 of a kilometer more during that, during that time frame. They've had a change in self-efficacy. They feel better. Maybe they had a better change in their ability level, which causes, again, a cascading effect of a change in physical competency, a physical acceptance change, and then overall it'll change their global self-esteem. And that's what we're looking for when we're given that behavioral change kind of a model. All right. So with that change, again, we showed it before, but these, if we look in terms of, if you follow my cursor right here, all right, in this region right here, we can see the changes in physical self-efficacy, competence, and acceptance, and that's all the mechanisms of change that we have with giving a change in exercise behavior. All right. So then we look at it from the perspective of, well, is it subjective or is it objective in terms of our measures? Well, subjective is, a way that a person perceives their own ability or what they're doing. Objective means that there is a flat out, whenever you're doing an evaluation, there's a flat out change in either a data point or something that is observed that doesn't create opinion. Subjective is more about opinion, whereas objective is very clear cut in terms of and that's why data and things like that. All right. So, again, with effects of exercise on body image, exercise is effective for enhancing body. Of course, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Now, does it affect men or women more? That, it really is the same for both. Well, and I've seen it a bunch of times with people that I've trained, athletes I've trained, general population I've trained, and really it's kind of crazy how you get a person who starts looking better and feeling better, and all of a sudden they're the way that they perceive their body, they're starting to dress differently. They're actually combing their hair, which for a guy, for guys in particular, they start combing their hair differently. They might have gotten a better haircut. They care more about everything that they're doing. Okay. But really, like it says here, exercise must be performed at moderate intensity or greater to have a better effect. We need overload. All exercises seem to be effective, of course, and a single bout can have an immediate effect, which is awesome. And that's exactly what we're looking for. All right. So again, looking from the perspective, that's that, in terms of the effects, well, there's another meta-analysis. If we look, we'll see here that, again, this is another research project that was done on how exercise changes body image. Um, Looking at everything, there are still some low effect sizes, but we have a little, like with adults, participant ages with adults is a large effect size, meaning that, or not it's almost a moderate effect size, where adults are more apt to, take part in exercise. But we're a little bit higher in terms of our effect size, being more small to moderate, which is a little bit, not that we're comparing the last results, but this just shows again that not everybody perceives it that way, and that's why we need more people to start taking accountability and change for what they're trying to do. All right. So with everything here, with potential mechanisms for change, what we're looking for is improvements in their physical fitness, increased self-efficacy, and then improved physical self-concept, and that's what we're looking for. But one of the things that we realize is that, if there isn't an improvement, that's why the X is there. If there isn't an improvement, well, then what's ultimately going to happen? Are they going to start, relapsing into some old habits or things like that, which can really change as well. All right. So again, if we look at the influences of self-perception, so it says here, with global self-esteem and physical self-concept effects on our behavior, we see that global self-esteem is not a consistent predictor of physical activity. All right. But and on the other end of that, physical self-concept plays a role in many of people's decisions to exercise. Well, yeah, what you're feeling, or how, if we go back again and look at what self-concept was, and with what we were, how we define ourselves plays a role in many people's decisions to exercise. 100% agree. Um, so those with positive physical self-perceptions are more likely to exercise. Oh, of course. I mean, we see it all the time. All right. Those who have negative self-perceptions, how they perceive their abilities and what they look like and things like that, they're less apt to, and that it's pretty generalized and straightforward. It's a very easy concept to understand. It's just, how do we get them to change is really the more important part of that. Okay. And then exercise and physical self-concept influence each other, of course. All right. Exercise and how we, our physical way of changing is going to, how it affects us is going to influence it. Definitely. So we can see here that exercise plays a monstrous role in that. So our self-esteem is going to change if we change our exercise, but it's not consistent. And that's really what the problem then, that's an underlying problem. All right. So with body image, it says here, like with exercise motivation, all right. And, appearance related exercise motives are associated with less autonomous forms of exercise motivation, poor exercise adherence, and poor body image. So here's where it gets crazy. What it's saying here is that if your motives are to change your appearance, okay, and that's appearance related exercise motives, if your goal is to change your appearance, then what's going to happen is less autonomic forms of exercise motivation. You're more apt to not just engage. You're going to need some other incentives is sometimes what happens. Okay? And that's why, autonomous, think about automatic, you're more apt to be automatic to do things. All right? Um, you know, Poor exercise adherence and poor body image. Well, yeah, and so we have to be aware of that. It's like if you're not willing to change it for you and to make the changes that you need, then ultimately it's really going to have a negative impact on you as a person. There's something called Fitspiration images, all right, and they have a tendency. If you look at it's, I'm assuming that this is when we talk about like. Because it's got the hashtag, if we go to social media, what's going to happen is women are going to have these negative effects that are going to occur from them by looking at these images, all right? Because it's not going to make them feel better because they probably see what they might want to look like or what they feel like they don't look like, and it creates this cascading effect of negative image and negative body, perceptions. Your mood changes, you're miserable, and that really causes a concern. All right. So because of that, though, you would think that it would be a way for motivation, but it's really not. It actually decreases, their exercise habit or trying to make that change. With, the setting, all right, women, with women here, this isn't, where there can be some tendencies here where there might be reluctancy to exercise based on how they perceive their body and what the setting is. All right. So because of that, you end up with more stress hormone release, and that causes them to feel worse. But really, I mean, if you think about it, if you have a female who is 100 pounds overweight, yeah, she is going to be very um, apprehensive to go into a big gym where a lot of people are working out and things like that. It's really scary. On the other hand, it says here, men report that sometimes the gym makes them feel good about their bodies, and sometimes the gym triggers negative feelings about their bodies. So men, on the other hand, are have some ability to feel good, but on the other hand, it doesn't mean it's all the time. You got to figure you can get down on yourself when you start comparing yourself to others. But getting into the gym, like for my own personal, I feel good when I get into workout. When I miss time is really when I do have those negative thoughts, like something's going to change. But that's because I want to keep my body in proper working order and stay well and healthy. All right. So with our practical recommendations, all right, what do we want to do? We want to be able to try to provide opportunities to get feedback on how people are performing, or what stages of change they're in, or how is their physical activity progressing. All right, because ultimately what you want to do is you want these individuals to know that there's way more value to being healthy, being fit, being well, being, slightly athletic. Because, just because you're not an athlete doesn't mean you can't be athletic. All right. With body image, one of the things here is, practical recommendations. Well, you do find a lot more, and this isn't like a dig on anybody, but you do find a lot more images of, or commercials or whatever it is, where you do have some, plus size women. That was a really big push for women to feel comfortable with their bodies. And that's a really important thing. But they should also understand too that with those images, it's being acceptive of that is great, and because everybody comes in all shapes and sizes, which is, that's what's great about being a human. It's just we need to, understand that, are these individuals healthy? Is everybody healthy from this? And that's what's more important. Okay. And then programs should focus on improving physical function, strength, endurance, versus changing physical appearance, because with those things comes a physical appearance change. It's amazing at some of the gyms I've coached at over the years, and working with all different types of populations, how if we work on just getting healthier and not worrying about losing weight or losing inches or whatever, and we just focus on getting better at the tasks at hand, how the physical appearance changes right before their eyes, and they're still trying to work harder. And it's like, hey, did you realize what you just did last week? And you talk about how they lost 5 pounds over the last 2 weeks, and they weren't even trying to, because they've started to feel better about their ability level. So it's like, and sometimes it kind of takes a back burner because you have their mind in a different area, which is great. That's what we want to see. All right. So, again, with body image, that fit principle we talked about previously: frequency, intensity, time, and type. All right. Well, we want to make sure that frequency, most days of the week, 3 to 5 days is great. Start people off at 1 to 2 if they need to, until they build up. Intensity is the most important part of everything, but it's, again, moderate to heavy. No matter if it's strength training, no matter if it's aerobic, we want to always have some variation. The type, everything. We want to combine everything we possibly can, whether it be, aerobic conditioning, resistance training, strength training. It could be plyometric things, as long as everybody builds up to it and they don't start with it, because plyometrics can be dangerous. But we're getting people to work in like a lot of different modalities. And then getting that 150 minutes a week of moderate, or 75 minutes of, add in that 75 minutes of vigorous, intense activity, on 2 or more days, is going to be really, really important. All right. And that then the changes with body image come from there. All right. So, I skipped over a few of these, your way of thinking. You can always go back and look at them. But I do like this issue for debate here where it says, should physical education classes be gender segregated to ensure that boys and girls receive appropriate curriculum to foster positive body image and self-esteem? It's a good, think about this as we end this here, but you want to think about this and, does that make sense? I mean, I remember in high school, we had separate boy and, male and female classes, boy and girl classes. Growing up, though, it was everybody together. So, is there a time where that should happen? I mean, maybe it does happen when you get into middle school so that, you can work with females or males in a different sense without making it feel weird that there's a distinct separation between boys and girls. But, again, I'm not stating any opinion here, but I'm just kind of making this saying to yourself, saying to you all that look at it, try to understand it. Is it really worth doing? Okay. So that's chapter 8. Lots of terminology here, but I think it's really easy to understand. So I hope that you can get some good takeaways here when we start talking about body image and self-esteem and self-concept, because those are all really important for us to understand our how things affect us and how we perceive things. So this is the last chapter of the week. So let's finish strong, and I hope to hear from everybody on Monday.